a story with many risks in it, I know. She is an author, an illustrator, a businesswoman, a multi-hyphenate. I would like to introduce you now to Susie Jaramillo.
My mom used to get a lot of notes that said, Susie does not know how to follow directions. And it was true. I marched to my own drummer, as I was told. I was dyslexic, and I couldn't spell to save my soul, but I could read. And I loved reading, and I read every single thing I could get my hands on. And my handwriting was really sloppy, but I could draw. And I loved drawing, and we didn't have a TV because my mom thought TV was evil. So I grew up on books, and when I wasn't reading, I was drawing. And little by little, you know, I got good, and kids noticed, and they were like, oh, you're an artist. And I was like, oh, that seems to be what I do well. And so when I graduated high school, and my mom was like, what do you want to do? I was like, I'm going to go to art school. And she was like, cool, that sounds like a plan. Because you know what? I was the number 4 girl child of 5, and the expectations were nice and low. So I could do whatever I wanted to do. And my siblings, of course, informed me that I would be broke because I was never going to be Picasso. So I had to be a starving artist because there's nothing really between being a Picasso or being a starving artist, right? So none of us had any idea that there was this whole creative field out there, right? I just knew that I wasn't cut out for a normal job. I wasn't cut out for a 9 to 5. You know, the jobs that I saw the adults around me have. I mean, I grew up in Melbourne, Florida, right? So, anyways, and I didn't know how good I was. I didn't know, like, you know, it's one thing to be decent in your, you know, high school senior year, but it's entirely different to go to art school with real artists and like to be able to, you know, make it your own, right? And so, I said, well, I don't know how good I'm going to be, but I'll find out, right? I just figured that, you know, I'd rather just lean into what I was good at than try to be what I was not, right? And so that was my first risk, going to art school and taking the risk of being broke. When I was 17, I came to New York City. I always knew I was going to come to New York City. New York or die. And when I got to art school, I went to Pratt, which is a wonderful school, and I realized very quickly I wasn't that good. I really wasn't. I wasn't that good. I was surrounded by kids that went to like art high schools, right? And who like their parents had identified that when they were 7 that Robert had talent, and they'd, you know, given him tutors and oil paints, and he was like a master by the time he got to Pratt, right? And so I was like, okay, that's okay. I'll work harder. You know, I'm smart. I felt good. I felt good about my intellect, and I was like, I'll work smart. I'll work harder, right? And so this leads us to my next risk. I joined a group that was called Drawing Group. So at Pratt, you know, foundation year is all about figure study. And we drew the figure for 8 hours a day, right? Charcoal, ink, you'd come home covered, right? But then a select few of us did Drawing Group. And Drawing Group was extended figure study from 8 o'clock to 10 p.m. One of us would pose in the nude, and the rest would draw. Yeah. And so when I was being recruited for this, I was informed that you got to see everybody else naked before you got up naked. So, you know, it's okay. You don't have to do it until you feel comfortable. You know, I was nervous because, you know, what is this going to do to my reputation? Like, is this going to get me in, you know, am I going to get a reputation or something? Or, you know, and also like, how are people going to see me differently? But I really wanted to be good. There was no place in my head for something mediocre, and I wanted to be the best I could possibly be. And if this gave me extended time to practice and to get good, I was gonna do it. And so the day of, it was my turn. I was nervous. I get on the stage. I was a Greek statue from the Metropolitan Museum, okay? I had poise, I had grace, and I was 18 and had nothing to be ashamed of, okay? So it all went well. And I did Drawing Group the whole time I was at Pratt, and I loved it. And Drawing Group did 2 things for me that were so important. One, it made me really good. I became really respected as a committed artist at Pratt. In fact, by the time I left my senior year, I was, you know, one of the only seniors recommended to Disney who was heavily recruiting at my school. In addition to that, it also taught me to not be afraid to bare my soul, to not be afraid to say, this is me, this is all of me. And I think that's such a fundamental trait that every single artist has to have, right? You have to be comfortable with who you are and what you're bringing to the table, and you present your best self. And so, speaking of Disney, that leads me to my next risk. You see, I was being heavily recruited by Disney, and they were like a big deal for me because I grew up in Florida, and so I went there a lot. And then in addition to that, my mentor at Pratt used to take us to Disney to draw the crowds and the Ferris wheel, and to study how Disney used culture and storytelling and the craftsmanship. And so it was kind of a big deal for me. And so when they flew me out and offered me a job, it caught me like off by surprise that I didn't want to take it. I actually turned it down. And everybody thought I was foolish. My mom, my teachers, my friends, everyone was like, "What are you doing? You are so arrogant," right? And at the time, I was like, yeah, but I don't want to iterate on their IP. I want to create my own IP for my own culture. Because even then, I was like, you know, I'm Latina, I'm Venezuelan, Ecuadorian, married to a Colombian, right? And I wanted to see my stories, like where were my franchise brands? Like where were they, right? And I kind of knew that I would create something, even though back then I had no clue what I was going to create, right? But I knew that I wanted to make something, and I also knew that I wanted to own it, because IP ownership is always kind of like, it's been important to me. I believe that artists should own what they create, and I believe that artists should benefit economically from what they create as well, right? And so instead, I went back to New York, broke, and I started hanging out with my sister's friends, who were all ad execs, not ad execs, but execs from the Latin space. Right? So it was like Puerto Rican, Cuban. I discovered this whole thing called the Hispanic market, right? Which I never knew existed. I don't know if you guys know that like the Latin economy is like the 5th largest economy in the world, and like there's more Latinos here than Canadians in Canada. Like it's like this whole thing that like I had no idea. Did you know that the United States is the #2 Spanish-speaking country in the world? Right? So anyways, there's this whole industry dedicated to explaining the Hispanic market to corporate, and then getting budgets and telling wonderful creative stories and building brand, right? And so I started an advertising agency with a bunch of these guys, and I had no experience in advertising, and I was broke. But it felt right. It felt right. And, you know, shocker, advertising is not brain surgery. You can figure it out, right? So, I became a sponge, and I learned from everyone around me. I learned from my co-founders. I learned from the people that I hired. I learned from my clients. I learned from everybody. And it was so much fun. I loved building. I loved, you know, casting for a given brand and for a given project. I loved creating brand stories that would actually move hearts and minds, right? I loved having impact. I loved that I could make a statement, a piece of art. And if you put it in a gallery, maybe 50 people will see it. But if you put it on a billboard, or you put it on TV, millions will see it, right? And so that idea of the impact stories and messaging can have, which at the time I was using it to sell things, but also that idea that people will see themselves represented and feel proud. And that idea that you as a creative are valuable because you're solving a business problem, right? And that was something that I really took to heart, because creativity can often be just so subjective, right? But if you're solving a business problem, if you're delivering an audience that people need, if you're solving a challenge that you have, all of a sudden you become more valuable as a creative, right? And so I did that for 12 years. We ran a small boutique Latin agency, and we worked with a lot of the hand in hand with a lot of the great general market agencies. And I did it for 12 years, and then I kind of hit a wall. And the wall was the following. 2 things were happening, 2 big trends. On the one hand, we were moving into a content space where every brand had to be a content brand, right? And so more and more it was about story, and also social media all of a sudden became a thing. And so you could own your own audience. And at the same time, I was really frustrated because they kept on putting me in this little Latin bucket. And yeah, I speak fluent English, which is, I grew up in Melbourne, Florida, right? So even though I did also live in Caracas for 4 years, and I speak fluent Spanish as well, I really felt that I had a global purview, and I wanted to bring, I mean, at the time, like salsa's out selling ketchup, it still is, by the way. Despacito was a thing, now it's Bad Bunny. So our culture was clearly having an impact, right? And at the same time, it was like, yeah, but your idea is cute, but we're gonna do this general market thing. Could you translate it? And so I was like, all right. The real opportunity for me is content. My people don't need people to sell them anything more. They're already over-indexing. I mean, we're 19% of the population, yet we buy 30% of the stuff. It's like, there was this thing on NPR the other day that, it's again, 19% of the population, but we make up for 42% of the streaming shows, right? In terms of what we consume, not what we do in front of the camera or behind the camera. There we're incredibly underrepresented, right? And so I kind of, like a voice inside of me had said, you need to go into content. You draw, so you should go into kids' content because they're the ones that like the pictures, right? And now you know what's needed. You know how you can serve because, again, I believe in listening to like what you love to do, what you do really well, how you can serve, and how you can make money, right? And so I sold the agency. And then I took another big risk, which is I completely walked away from advertising and I took time off for 2 years. So I married this wonderful gentleman over here and I made a deal with him. I said, sweetie, give me 2 years. Give me 2 years to incubate, to listen to myself, to incubate my ideas, right? To draw, to paint, to think. And in 2 years, if nothing happens, I will get a job, right? And so at the end of 2 years, by then I was having kids too, right? And I was, okay, where are my board books? Where's my apps? Where's my, sing-along beautiful videos? Where's my brands? Like, where are they? And they didn't exist. Just fun experiment, all right? Think of a successful, like a Latino preschool show. Just in your minds. Like, how many of you can think of a successful Latino preschool show? Okay, if you're all thinking Dora, just really quick, Dora's 23 years old, okay? Dora's 23 years old and was not created by a Latino, just saying, And, but Dora is a $15.8 billion brand, right? So clearly, Dora resonated with a lot of people, right? So since Dora, created 23 years ago, there has not been much. Right? And so I was like, not only are we 19% of the population, we are 26% of kids. 26% of kids, and yet we only appear in 5% of media, which is a business opportunity, quite frankly. And so I was like, okay, I can do this. I know how to build brands. I know how to run teams. I know the stories. I love the stories. I love culture. I'm going to start with the simplest thing, which is the low-hanging fruit, which is honestly a public service. I'm going to take all the wonderful Latino nursery rhymes that I know are popular, whether you're Cuban, you're Mexican, you're Venezuelan, you're Ecuadorian, and I'm going to make a beautiful Latino nursery rhyme brand. And it's going to be called Canticos. And it's going to be musical, and it's going to celebrate the different types of musical genres. And it's going to bring all of these wonderful nursery rhyme characters, and I'm going to start with books. And I'll be non-commercial about the books, right? Because I know how moms like to be non-commercial. And I wanted to do books, sing-along video, and app at the same time because I felt like kids expect the app. They expect, like, where can I touch? Where can I see? Like, they expect it all, right? And I got lucky. So when I started having lunch with people and saying what I was doing, it was like going back into, like, civilization. So I did no FOMO for 2 years, and I was like, okay, now I'll start talking to people. I found like the one person who was like just as crazy as I was and just as eager to do something in this space. And he, used to be the global media buyer for Walmart and the global media buyer for Starcom MediaVest. So he knew the business opportunity and the corporate appetite for the Latin customer. And he was having kids. And he was Dominican, his wife was from El Salvador, and he was feeling the same thing I was feeling, which was like, where's our stuff, right? And so we joined forces and we created a company called Encantos, okay? So Encantos was created in 2015, and Encantos is a lovely word because it kind of embodied all the charm and magic that we wanted to bring to kids. And we roped our spouses into it, right? My husband on the tech side, his wife on the social media side. And so these two Latino families came together to create original IP centered in Latin culture that would have global appeal. Again, the vision was our culture has global appeal. It's made for everyone. Just like everyone can eat tacos, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone can dance Bad Bunny. Everyone will love these stories. That was the vision, right? And so we built Canticos, and Canticos came out with a bang. We executed well, I have to say. We hired the best studios. We even knew how to raise money. I don't know how to raise money. we raised money. And we built a beautiful brand that had, we worked with Nickelodeon. It was on TV. It was on YouTube. It has music publishing. And you know what? The next thing I knew, we were Emmy nominated, which was, really exciting. All of a sudden, I was an Emmy nominated director. And you guys get it? I wrote every song. I storyboarded all the first, the first iterations. It was like everything. I was doing everything all at the same time. I was illustrating, I was writing, and I again, loving every second. And so now it's like, okay, Canticos is out there. If you're Latin, you know who we are because we're really I get the love letters, right? I get the moms telling me, thanks to you, my child is bilingual, right? And now it's again, taking those risks. How do we continue to convince gatekeepers that Latin culture and Latin IP has global appeal, right? How do we convince gatekeepers and streamers that it's okay if you have more than one Latin property on your channel or on your platform, right? How do we convince gatekeepers that, authenticity behind the camera is just as important as the story that you're trying to tell, and to have Latino storytellers telling Latino stories, owning the IP that they create is really important, right? And how do we continue to build that direct relationship with our fan base and leverage the technology platforms that are out there to get scale and to get audience so that we can grow and we can scale? And so, I don't know, we're still figuring all of this out, right? Every single day is a new challenge, it's a new thing. But it's so something I'm willing to risk to figure out. I know that I won't be old and bitter thinking, damn, I wish I had done this. Because I could fail, in which case I went out in a blaze of glory and all good. But I really do think that every single day there's always a new thing to figure out, and there's always a new sort of risk to be taken, and they're all worth it.